Okay, so we are gonna get into atomic journaling. This is working title. If you've got any recommendations, please let me know. I kind of just smashed together the bullet journal and atomic habits because it's heavily influenced by both. So we're gonna get into that today, and then I want to maximize the time for building it from scratch. The way that it's set up, and if you've used Manifest, it leverages databases quite a bit. Being able to see how those things are connected and building a lean like 1.0 version from scratch together hopefully gets us a little bit more comfortable with working with databases and relations and really taking advantage of the filtering and sorting that you can do when you relate multiple databases together. So that's the goal for today. And as I mentioned, just a few notes on what is atomic journaling, and this is something that just evolved in my personal workspace, and then I've just been exploring journaling in general more intentionally over the past several months. Atomic journaling, this is something that on the one hand, I have always journaled on some form or another, going all the way back to middle school, tracking dreams, tracking how I was doing in sports, things like that. And it took different forms as the years went on. And one big limitation that I never quite got past was it was hard to impossible to be able to retrieve specific, entries or go back to ideas that I had, and couldn't really come up with a system of retrieving specific journal entries. And because of working and learning about weekly planning and reflection and setting intentions, the lack of being able to retrieve certain notes or ideas or reflections kind of made it always a little bit limiting in terms of what the journal could do. And there's absolutely big benefits to writing out journal entries on paper. We have morning pages, which there's tons of positives on. There's the bullet journal method. If you have tried that, is where I started before this model. The main focus with you creating an atomic journal in Notion is being able to connect entries to things like projects, like a daily planner, setting intentions for a week or a month or a quarter, and having it still keep that journal feel, rather than creating an intentions list and a reflection list, trying to put them all together, and then use these connections to filter the journal in interesting ways. So ideally retrieve that stuff that I wrote a couple months ago or even a year or two ago. So that's the goal going into this experiment. And if it's something that you explore, hopefully this is helpful. And to zoom out a little bit, this kind of came in my feed, and this was very much in the same thinking on this from Ali Abdallah, but looking at the daily highlight, if we were to start anywhere with just one new habit when it comes to journaling, finding and writing a highlight for the day. What was a win? If we want to get a level deeper, what was a challenge for the day? And really just reflecting on how things are going, as a way to capture those ideas and be able to refer back to them. So this quote from James Clear really has had an impact on how I've approached things like productivity, especially when it comes to habits. Journaling on paper, always been a struggle in terms of its own space. And again, a lot of positives, but for me, doing so much in Notion, the goal has been, how can I, embed this in the space that I'm already working in and do it consistently and have it provide value in terms of reflection and setting intention. When we think about journaling, the habit building is something that we could maybe overlook because it's such a big aspect of whether we abandon our journaling over time or whether we start to build it as a kind of automatic instinctive habit. Definitely not easy for building any habit, much less writing or capturing ideas consistently in whether it's a physical space like a journal or a digital space. And I won't get too much into this, but if you haven't read the bullet journal method, it's awesome. And it really just has the same philosophy and is really the big inspiration for this, as looking at journal entries as kind of bits or little blocks and organizing them in a way that's easier to go back to. And in this case, it is like a paper version. So you do set up an index and set up symbols to identify whether something's a goal or whether something's a note or a task. But definitely a super interesting model for capturing ideas in a systematic way. All right, quick walkthrough. When we think about embedding a journal into a existing productivity space, for me, it came down to three key questions that hopefully get an idea of how can we start to connect our journal to other databases or other spaces that we're already using? So first one is, what types of entries are we writing? So things like, are we setting intentions? Are we using it as a gratitude journal? Specifically, if we're doing like daily reflection, are we logging wins and challenges? And things that are a little bit more broad, reflecting if we're on the weekly, monthly, or quarterly scale, just reflecting very qualitatively on how things went as a kind of stream of consciousness. And then things like ideas, which I just started doing in the journal, and then snaps, which if you are a visual person, logging your days in a more visual journal to be able to go back to and celebrate it in the future. The second part, which is what we're currently tracking. So I know some of us go more into project management in Notion versus using it as a daily planner or as a habit tracker. In the template that's included in this page, you might not need the project, so you might not need the daily planner, in which case I would definitely just get rid of it, where the journal works with whichever databases it's connected to. I know with Notion templates, it could get really overwhelming where we've got this kind of perfect system, but maybe we don't need 2 or 3 or 4 parts of it, but we do need some other parts, but it could be hard to customize and like personalize, especially if it's a template that's broad in scope. And then like areas, if we organize things that are business related or personal or things like finances, and we go into these little buckets. One great model, which is Tiago Forte's PARA model, which is like projects, areas, resources, and archives. Areas are like a way to filter, these are all my business projects, these are all my teaching projects, and just allows for us to track more things without necessarily getting overwhelmed from hundreds or thousands of tasks in the same space. Hopefully, if you're exploring journaling, it could be helpful to jot down some ideas across these 3 spaces. Yes, PARA, one. And I can link to a resource if, I'll just add it right now. So if you check out Tiago Forte and PARA, and I know he has a YouTube channel, which he just kind of got going, and a lot of great stuff. And there's also a podcast from a year ago that has a breakdown of the method, but really cool. And side note, the PARA method was a big inspiration for a lot of YouTube creators, like Marie Poulin referenced it quite a bit, and Thomas Frank in his latest template also is inspired by PARA. So Tiago Forte is pretty awesome when it comes to just like capturing ideas and staying organized while there's an overflow of information coming at us nonstop. If you're building a journaling system in Notion or elsewhere, these 3 questions could get you going in terms of what exactly you're trying to track, how can we start to create types of journal entries, and where can we connect these to our journal. So we are going to take a look at, first, we're going to take a look at the little resource that's included. So if you go into the link here, there's the Atomic Journal. If you've used Manifest, this is like a super pared down variation of it, where we're not really looking at things like tracking habits or exercise or creating a library, and it's really just the kind of key databases that are most closely connected to a journal. But it does use a lot of the same formatting as the weekly planner, which takes advantage of Notion's like latest update to databases, which allows you to set up databases in, if I zoom in a little bit, you can organize databases in this like tabbed view, but you can also bring in you can also bring in views from different databases entirely. So the weekly planner brings in everything from OKRs to journal entries to daily planner, and you can just be in the same space all the time. So there's a few key views, and so we'll look at how it's structured, and then we'll look at the same views in an example that's populated with journal entries to get an idea of what are the benefits of organizing a journal in a database and in these database views. First, I'll just briefly go through these views and how they're filtered, and then we'll take a look at the example. So if we look at I'm gonna start in the systems space. If you've seen like any of my other content, I always have a space for just databases and like the highest level databases in my Notion workspace, really as a way to go in and know these are the most important databases, and everywhere else in the workspace leveraging linked views to that workspace. Now that databases, we can see multiple in the same page or in the same view, it could also get confusing or disorganized if we've got databases living throughout our workspace and we can't quite remember where the original is unless we maybe search. But if you've used search in Notion, it's a little slow sometimes and might not give the results that you're looking for. And in cases like mine, where we're creating multiple templates, you've got 40 projects databases because of all the templates that you're organizing. This is a way to organize what are the key databases that are part of your workspace. So if we look at the journal template, we have the journal database. So this has our entries, the type. So if we take a look here, gratitude and setting intentions, these are, typically like first thing in the morning type of entries versus wins and challenges, which are maybe like if you're reflecting at the end of the day, it's a great opportunity to just log at least one of each. Reflection, which is if we think about completing a project and reflecting on how did it go? What are some things that are top of mind going into future projects? And then snaps are basically just photos if we're like creating a visual journal or a visual component. And then ideas, which is a way to quickly capture ideas, thoughts, things like that. And then if we go back to systems, we've got these other databases. For example, if we look at projects, there's an example here where we've got projects that have tasks associated. Some of these might be like unlinked because it doesn't have all the databases as say like the manifest system, but also don't want to overwhelm with a bunch of extra databases that are like not really core to journaling. But if we go to the daily log, there's a lot of stuff in here, mostly just for filtering purposes. But the main thing that we want to take a look at is there are like templates, and this is again pulled from like the manifest resources, but there's templates for days. So if we were to, we'll take a look at creating one, but I can expand these other properties, which is really just ways to filter so that we're only seeing daily planner pages of this week or this month. So it just helps to have these like filters set up. But you can see here that the journal entries are connected to the daily log. So we'll just jump into kind of like what this looks like pre-populated so that we have a better idea of what this ends up looking. Let's close this here. And then we'll get this a little bit larger. Cool. All right, so we've got capture. This is an example of a card. We're looking at the journal database. I can make these a little bit smaller. And then if we get to snaps, we can surface the name of the entry. And then if you wanted to also bring in what day was it from, is it a personal photo versus a business photo, you can decide how often you want or how granular you want to get with it. But a really fun way to reflect, especially if we're looking at snaps from like the past month or like the past year even, could be a lot of fun. If we get into the daily log, this is looking at that daily log database and where the only property that's visible is the journal entry. So if I'm in May 13th, let's say I want to set up today, we can say today's Friday. Again, database template, we can set this once and then all we have to do is click and it pre-populates with the cover image and the page icon. And then here we could add entry. I can add one here. And then if I create a new journal entry, we can see that it's already connected to this date. It just allows for better filtering in the future. And then if I want to set a type for that, I could just set this as a reflection because it doesn't really qualify as like one of the other types. And then if I go one level deeper, if you do set up templates for your journal entries, we can also say apply it to a particular area. I can give it that content creation, a little stamp and little leaf, and now it's connected to that date. So if we go back to the daily planner, we can see here at the end of the week, let's say, we can see in one space all of our journal entries from the week and see them all in one place. So if we go into projects, if you're somebody who likes to manage projects, but also about setting intentions for projects or reflecting on how projects went, this could be helpful too. So if we dive into how this is working, so we have a list view of the journal database, and we have two properties that are visible. So I'm going to move this over a little bit. So we can see here, there's the project that it's assigned to and also the type. So in this case, their intentions for the project. And again, this is set up as a like chronological. So if I go into sorting, I can see that it's really only sorted by the time that it was created going backwards. So the most recent shows up at the very top. Yeah. If we go into by type, so this is another filtered view, and this is really cool when we're looking at a longer time span, like a month or a quarter, and we really just want to read through entries on everything from gratitude to intentions, wins, challenges, all that stuff. And again, if we look at the sorting, most recent is at the top, but then we can see everything, and we can also organize by type. So to zoom out a little bit, we're looking at a board view, and if we look at how it's grouped, we're grouping by these types that we had set up in the journal database. So really fun, and this is probably the most common in terms of like weekly reflection, where it just gives a quick snapshot of how the week went. And if you can see at the bottom, these are also showing the days that are associated with that journal entry, which is also pretty cool in terms of just seeing a chronology there. If we, let's say, wanted to create a calendar view, there might be a lot in there, but let's just try to do that here. Let's say we want to duplicate the, say by type, we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to set this one up as a calendar. There's a lot of changes to databases over the past couple months, but here we can select the source, which we're going to keep as journal, but the layout we can change to calendar, and show database title, show calendar by date or by created. We'll do that. And if you're on a big screen and you can maximize this, let's say we want to open this full screen, we can start to see all of the entries in a calendar view. And then what I'd want to do is turn off all of the other properties. So a little bit limited with calendar view because we've got so little space, but could be an option as well. And then if you want to just see everything in one place, also reflecting in whatever time scale, this allows you to just see a list of entries, and then also see how they're categorized, like what type of entries were involved. One of the key things with organizing these as databases is not only can you connect one database to another, but if we use Rollups, we can bring in properties from a different data into your journal. So let's say if I'm going to go into the projects database, and you can see I'm tracking things like if it's tied to a particular key result or what is the priority level of the project. But let's say I want to bring in maybe the key result of the project, and I want to see that in my journal. I haven't tested this out yet, but let's see if this works. So I'm going to create a new property, and I'm going to call this project key result. And we're going to set this as a rollup. And then when we think about the relation, this is like the starting point. So we're saying, okay, in what database am I pulling in this property? Like, where is it coming from? So if I set this to project, then I get all of these properties that are associated with projects. So if I want to look for the key result, I can say, show me the original. And now I've got the project, the key result that's tied to that project in the journal entry. Is this absolutely necessary for everybody's workflow? Probably not. But as we get more comfortable in Notion, and especially using databases, what typically happens is we start to find interesting like optimizations for where we can see information and not having to navigate to multiple pages or multiple databases, and being able to bring in information that's most important to you at that particular moment in time. Let's say if we're reflecting on a project and we do want to know, hey, what key result was that tied to as I'm going through a reflection? When we're building our journals, definitely trying to recreate it from scratch, identifying what properties do we want to track, and having an awareness that is likely to change over time. that we might have types of journal entries that we just either don't use or maybe are less priority. If you're not somebody that likes to save photos in your journal in Notion, then snaps, we can delete that and focus in maybe on only 2 or 3 types of journal entries. And this is something that with one-on-one coaching and even working with bigger teams, it's very possible to get super excited about Notion, try to implement a bunch of systems at the same time, and then it quickly either unravel or get really overwhelming. Starting small, looking at a journal database by itself, this technically doesn't need all of these other databases to work. So if I go into my journal, this one's set up by type, so it's a little bit easier to follow, but we could just set up one database and set types and then set templates. You could start there without the relational stuff, but the relations can bring up a lot of interesting connections. And at the end of the day, if you like to execute or build a habit of journaling that's a break from work or separate from your work mode, then it should probably live on its own without those relations and just have a space to plan, reflect, set intentions, things like that. For me, it's made it easier to build a habit because I could set it as part of like my morning routine and like afternoon routine, and it's already tied into existing workspaces. So I don't feel that like cognitive load of closing a screen and opening a notebook, or even closing a screen and then opening another app. That's a personal preference, but hopefully that's helpful. Definitely starting with this kind of like analog exercise of defining what types of entries do you already do often or you would like to start building. And I think if it's a new habit that's being built, definitely starting one thing at a time, mainly because any type of habit is just really hard to build and sustain over time. It could take anywhere from a month to several months to really build a habit that's kind of automatic in your routine. Starting small with this, starting to think through categorizing types of journal entries. And then if you're already using Notion for things like project management or daily plan, even if you're not organizing them in a database, it could be helpful to think through where you might want to link your journal database elsewhere in your workspace. And again, the beauty of Notion is you can surface not only information in multiple places, but you can filter that information. So maybe I just want to see the journal entries from this week, or I just want to see my gratitude entries, and only surface the information that you need to block out the extra noise that could be distracting or could detract us from what we're trying to do. And then the last question again is thinking through if you are using Notion for different areas of your life, that's business, personal, finance, health, teaching, then looking at like ways to maybe color code or use emoji or use icons to further separate out, which can go a long way to visually organize types of entries, especially if we think of looking at a month's worth of entries and quickly scanning and reflecting on that front. And again, this I'll also share the guide and the template in the follow-up email for you all, but also for people who didn't make it. And if you're diving into journaling, definitely would like to hear like how it's going. If you have a different model that you use, I'm super interested in just learning, because Notion creators there's such a variety of approaches and like strategies and methodologies that I'm sure there's just a wide variety of approaches to things like journaling. Definitely curious to hear how it's working for you all. On that note, hope that was helpful, and hope to stay in touch. Let me know if you're journaling. I'm curious to see like how it goes. And if you've got any recommendations on things that you think would be helpful to do, like a webinar or create content for, also feel free to let me know, whether you've connected on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or via email. So hope you have a great rest of your days, nights, weekends, and hope to see you in the next webinar.